I'd like to welcome each back this evening. Looks like the warning of the coronavirus got about 30% of our attendance from this morning. Glad that you chose to be back tonight. Now, ask you a question. Don't answer it, just asking you a question. You ever get bent out of shape? Woo, that's loaded, ain't it? That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Are you bent out of shape? Now, to ask that question, we need to understand that there are different ways of being bent out of shape. We're going to look at a lesson this evening from Luke's account in chapter 13, if you'd like to be turning there. We're going to talk about some verses there in a minute. That sometimes we measure people by what we see superficially. We sometimes look at people and see them from a physical standpoint and we draw a conclusion, or from a standpoint of how they speak or how they carry themselves, and we draw a conclusion without knowing the whole story. And then sometimes we have to change what was our first impression. First impressions are usually pretty good because we usually put forth, typically speaking anyway, a better foot than normal. You know, we want to make people feel that we're pretty good folks all around, right? So sometimes first impressions can be genuine, sometimes they can be tricky at best. But when we see folks that sometimes our first impression is, well, you know, they're a little bit out of shape, then that might be what's going on, or there may be something else actually that's going on. Turn with me, Luke chapter 13. I'd like to read tonight verses 10 beginning through verse 17. And he, Christ, was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. You see trouble going on already, right? And behold, there was a woman which had a spirit of infirmity, 18 years, and was bowed together, and could in no wise lift herself up. And when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said unto her, Woman, thou art loosed from thine infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. And the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, and said to the people, There are 6 days in which men ought to work. In them therefore come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. The Lord then answered him and said, Thou hypocrite, doth not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or his donkey from the stall, and lead him away for watering? And ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, who Satan hath bound, lo, for these 18 years, be loosed from his bond on the Sabbath day? And when he had said these things, all his adversaries were ashamed, and all the people rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. I'd like to take a look at the lesson this evening, and I'd like for us to have a better idea sometimes that, you know, sometimes things are more than just meets the eye. I want us to look at the various characters in this lesson that Christ gives. First of all, if we were to look at this from the very standpoint of what happened, Christ healed somebody. That's great news, right? This woman had been in this predicament for 18 years. And Christ just simply said, you're healed. And she was healed. Now, notice what was said. It said, the King James Version said, that it was a spirit of infirmity. So, a demon of Satan, a spirit, had made her infirm. He had bent her over at the waist for 18 years, and she couldn't stand upright. Otherwise, obviously, reasonably healthy. Now, I don't know about you, but I can imagine having to walk around for 18 years, bent over, and unable to do anything about it. I'm quite sure that she had been to all of the doctors in her hometown and the surrounding areas that she could afford to go to, only to find out there's nothing they can do. They have no idea what's wrong with her. I suppose that even with modern day medicine and technology, it will be difficult to find a cure for someone like that until she met Jesus. Now, I would have you to understand, our first impressions of the lesson may not be our best impression of the lesson, because I started off by asking you, have you ever been bent out of shape? And I know what you were thinking. Well, I know some of what you were thinking. I might know all of what you were thinking. This woman was bent out of shape, wasn't she? She was literally, her body was literally bent out of shape. This isn't normal. We don't see people walking around, typically speaking, bent over at the hip, bent over at the waist, and not able to straighten up. It's not a normal thing. If we saw someone like that, we would ask them, is there anything we can do? Or can I help you in any way? Or what happened to you? We would think that some great horrific thing happened to that individual. Maybe they were in a car wreck. Maybe they were born that way and had some degenerative disease or something that caused their bones or their tendons or their muscles to cause this look in their life. But what we have to look at this woman is this. Though physically she was bent out of shape, morally, ethically, spiritually, she was straighter than probably anybody in the synagogue outside of Christ. Her attitude was right. And sometimes we have to realize that it's better to have bent bodies and straight priorities, right, than bent priorities and straight bodies. It's all about attitude. It's all about priorities. Now, notice where she was. She was right there in the synagogue. She didn't use the excuse of, well, when I go, I'm going to be bent over and it's going to be hard for me to get there. It's going to be hard for me to get into the service itself, and I'm going to be uncomfortable sitting there in an awkward position all day long. And, right? What causes us to have bad priorities? What causes us to be willing to miss services? Well, I'd rather be doing what I want to do. I heard that sometime this week there may be, I'm amazed at the things people call and ask me as the MA director, do you think we should cancel church tonight? I had a guy call me up one time, a preacher. We had a storm coming in, and it was going to come in maybe Thursday or Friday. He said, do you think we ought to cancel our Wednesday night services? Do you skip church because you're a little bit sick or a lot of it sick? You see, that's the idea, right? This woman, I don't think that anybody would have judged her if she'd have very rarely made it to church service. Right? But she was there. And the fact that she was there caught the eye of the most important person in the synagogue. It called the eye of Jesus Christ because he not only knew her infirmity, but he also evidently knew her heart. And it says in the text that he called her to him. Notice, and he said, "Woman, thou art loosed." Satan has no more hold on you. He cannot bind you any longer. He cannot cause you to be physically bent out of shape any longer. I think Christ helped her in her physical being bent out of shape because he was so touched by her spiritual bent into shape, if that's proper language. But he took note of that. You know, a lot of times folks quick to go to church, and this occasion we're under the Jewish law and still in the days of Christ under the laws of Moses, and so they were there at the tabernacle. We would say go to church, and in essence it's the same thing that was going on there. What's important? That's priorities, right? What's most important in our life? Why would I not want to be at church with God's people worshiping God? What would stop me from being at church with God's people worshiping God? Well, it takes very little for some. And they would justify it quickly and say, well, I was there Sunday morning, or, you know, one of the things, popular things today is, well, I watched it on television, so I'm fine. And there's times when we're sick. There's times when we, you know, are hindered by our jobs or what have you. But most times, if we're honest with ourselves, our priorities aren't where they ought to be. We willfully miss services because we just simply don't have our priorities right. Her priorities were right, even though her body was bent all out of shape. Now, I want to flip that script just a little bit. I want to look at the leader of the synagogue here. It says here that he was verse 14, the ruler of the synagogue. He was the one that was in charge. He was in charge of making sure that everyone came in a timely fashion, an orderly fashion, that the proper precautions were taken, you know, perhaps the cleansing of the hands and the proper attire being worn and all of this. And when he saw what went on, he got bent out of shape. Did you notice what it said? It says, as soon as the ruler of the synagogue, verse 14, saw what happened, he answered with indignation. What? He got mad. Who does this man think he is, coming into the synagogue on the Sabbath and healing someone? Now, he called it labor. Listen to what Christ did. Christ spoke and said, woman, you are healed. He did touch her. He didn't pick her up. He didn't shake her. He didn't spin her all around. He didn't throw her across the floor. He didn't run up and down the aisle. He didn't shout hallelujah. He just spoke and he touched her and she was healed. Don't sound like work to me. But he got mad. Why? Because something was done in his synagogue without A, his permission, and B, him getting the recognition for it. And you know, that still happens in churches across the land today. Folks get all bent out of shape because some project, because some ideal, because some event wasn't their idea. Yet they weren't the one that was doing some good. You know, there's things that it shouldn't even be a discussion. You know, a lot of times we find folks that aren't willing to do, and we could just draw a line there and fill in the blank, erase it, fill in the blank, erase it, on and on, and just name things that are commonplace to be done at a church building, on church grounds, on a regular basis, that nobody wants to do, but let somebody else do them or do it differently than they think it ought to be done, and they're going to be filled with indignation. Well, what did they do it that way for? You know, if we decided, and we've done this before, and I've heard things back then when it happened, if we decided to paint this auditorium, and we asked for volunteers who wants to help paint the auditorium, and one or two show up, and nobody else shows up, and nobody puts any input, what color do you think we're? I don't know. And then somebody goes and picks a color. Now just use your imagination, whatever your favorite color is. And we come in here and paint the walls of this auditorium, I guarantee you somebody, the next time that the church assembles, is going to say, well, what did you paint it that color for? Right? Get mad because somebody else done something even though they didn't, and it wasn't to meet with their approval. That's what happened here. This man, this ruler of the synagogue, should have been jumping with joy that Jesus, first of all, showed himself in his, quote, place of worship, end quote. And secondly, that this great deed was done. That wasn't work or labor at all, other than being a labor of love. He should have said, wow, I wish you'd have been here earlier. I've known this poor woman for 18 years. She's been more faithful to the church than most well-bodied people. And the fact now that she's healed of her infirmity, this is a great day for us to celebrate and give praise to God. It should have been his attitude. But his priorities were just as bent and twisted as his attitude was, wasn't it? It was all out of whack. And sometimes people get out of shape not physically, but emotionally. Their priorities get out of kilter, turned and twisted in such a way that causes them not to be able to see what is most important. Turn with me, hold your place here, we're going to come up back. Matthew chapter 18. Christ had then spoke on this matter in verse 15, and this wasn't the way that this should have been handled. This is what Christ said. Matthew 18 and verse 15. He says, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. That ain't what happened, is it? Notice what happened. Listen to the rest of it. Rest of verse 14, it says that he answered with indignation because of Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, and he said, the ruler of the synagogue, to the people, what? Instead of talking to Jesus and saying, man, you can't come in here and heal people on the Sabbath, he turned around to the people as though he were in charge. He's going to tell Jesus what's what, right? He's going to straighten out the Son of God. And he's told the people, he says, you know, there's 6 days in the week to do your work or to be healed. So don't come up here on the Sabbath for a healing. Really. Really. And you know, folks, today, I was talking to some folks earlier about that. In fact, one of my deputies. He said, hey, brother, I got a question for you. You know, there's a couple of new Bible editions out now. I said, yeah. He said, you know, there's verses missing in them. And there's parts of verses missing in them. I'm like, yeah. He said, there's a verse over in Acts that talks about the reason that we're baptized, why we are baptized. It's not even in there. I said, yeah. That's where we're headed. I said, when mankind decides that the Bible does not fit him, they're going to make the Bible fit him. What they're going to tell God what to do. He went on to say, and I thought this was quite interesting. I didn't realize this fact. He said, the company that publishes these new editions that are wild and jumping off the shelves. Also published the Bible of Satan. Now, do you think that it's just coincidence that the same folks who published the Bible of Satan are publishing this outright abomination of God's Word? Why? Because they think they can tell God what to do. They think they can tell God what they're going to do, and God will have to accept it because they're the ruler of the synagogue and they're in charge. I got news for you. You better get your attitude right before God, because God is not a toy to play with. Our God, we talked about this morning, is a righteous God. He's a God of justice. I shared with him a very well-known scripture that he knew, that everybody knows, that the ones who write that new Bible version know. But going back to Revelations, the last verse is there. Do not add to nor take from this book. Right? For the plagues will be added and your name will be taken out of the Lamb's book of life. But they say that does not apply to me because I'm bigger than the book, and I can change the book to fit what I think it ought to say, and this is what I think it ought to say. I don't subscribe to the notion of what the Bible says. Oh, by the way, some of the words he may mention too that are missing, and he's correcting it. Just happen to be written in red. Now, it's not just enough to mess around with the Bible, but when you mess around with all-out words of Jesus Christ, this ruler of the synagogue says, that's Jesus Christ. That's this new man come to town and claim to be the Son of God. Well, I'm fixing to set him straight. You ain't coming up here in my place and doing that. Sounds kind of like what Paul dealt with a couple of times, doesn't it? Sounds like what John dealt with, right? On a couple of occasions. And we think about that and we say, that's just about retarded right there. That's just all messed up. Hold on now. What about when we tell Jesus by our actions, our deeds, our words, the things we do, the things we leave undone? What are we telling Jesus when we go against what we know to do that's right? I don't care what you say. You're not the boss of this. I'm in charge, and I'm going to do what I want. When our priorities get bent all out of shape, our life begins to show serious problems. Just because we're going to have plenty of time, you're going to get out of here early tonight. Give you 2 or 3 examples, Father, and there are several examples. You go back to the book of John chapter 5, the first 16 verses there. Again, Christ, on the Sabbath, he heals the man that is there at the pool of Bethesda. The crippled man, he tells him, he says, take up your bed and go home. The man takes up his bed and he starts walking home after being healed. And some of the Jews stop him and say, wait a minute, where are you going? You know you can't tote your bed on the Sabbath. Now they knew this man. Instead of saying, oh wow, you're healed. In fact, you feel good enough, you can tote your bed. Wow, that's great. What happened to you? You see, their attitude, their priorities were twisted, weren't they? And they got angry. Isn't it amazing sometimes when people get angry when something good has happened? You go play the lottery. You put your $1, $2, $10, I don't know, whatever it is, on the table. Somebody comes in right behind you, and you get nothing. And they win $100,000. Do you say, well, bless you, that is some kind of good. That is good for you. Or do you get mad? It's real now, ain't it? We understand what we would do, don't we? Well, that ain't right. I should have won that. He broke in line. No, he didn't. He was ahead of him. You know, right? Indignation, because why? Our priorities are twisted. We're too self-centered to be able to look at and congratulate others for good that happens in their life. Another example, in the book of John chapter 9, the whole chapter, first 41 verses. The blind man there that was healed at the pool of Siloam. And the Pharisees saw what happened and they questioned him. Wait a minute. What are you doing? Oh, it was on the Sabbath. I'm washing my eyes in the pool. You can't do that on the Sabbath. And what you mean you can see? Who healed you on the Sabbath? Did you go to the doctor? Did that doctor open his office on the Sabbath and heal your eyes? Well, no, I was healed by a man. Who was it? I don't know. Well, I think you're lying to us. Instead of, wow, this man's been blind all these years. Now all of a sudden he can see. Let's rejoice. Let's go home with him. Let's go to his parents' house. Remember, that's where he was. And in fact, they did. So when they got to the parents' house and said, hey, look here. Little Joey can see. Look. They said, now, exactly what happened to your boy? Mom said, we don't know. I said, ask him. He's grown. We didn't ask him. We don't like his answer. Now you tell us what happened to that boy. Grown man. You see, they were all being out of shape because their priorities were all being out of shape, right? They couldn't celebrate with something new. One more example. In the book of Luke chapter 8, verse 26, beginning through verse 40, there's a story told there about the wild man of the Gadarenes. Remember when Christ came and the demons that were in this man, and they were multiple, they recognized him and called him Jesus of Nazareth, right? Don't do us any harm. In fact, we know that you can destroy us, so do us a favor. Just let us go over into them swine over there feeding in the field. And Jesus said, that's fine, go ahead. And the swine, they didn't like it either. It made them go mad, and they ran off the cliff out into the ocean and drowned. And everybody should have said, wow, this man has been a danger to himself and to others. We've known him. We've known his family for all of these years. And now look at him. He's sitting in his right mind, and he's eating, and he's clothed. We are so happy for him. No, that's not what they did. In fact, specifically the herdmen of the sheep, and even those in the community, told Jesus, what you need to do is you need to get out of here. You're getting on our last nerve. You costing us money. Those were our swine. Forget this man. He's not worth as much as these swine are. All our hogs have run off and dead. Instead of, look here, we got our friend back. Now, I want to up the ante right here just a little bit. This isn't scripture. This isn't even alluded to, but I just want to throw in a what if. Because it's possible. What if that man that was healed was close kin to one of these herdsmen? Have you ever thought about that? What if? He very well could have been. Well, still, he's not worth as much as our hogs are. They were filled with indignation. Why? Because their priorities were all out of shape. This woman, Luke 13, had been in this predicament for 18 years. Instead of rejoicing, this righteous man, and I say that with very little confidence, this righteous man of the synagogue had nothing but indignation. He was angry. I want to look at one more point. Not just this woman that was bent out of shape, her body. And not just this ruler of the synagogue that was bent out of shape in his priorities. But I also want to look at the law that Jesus talked about. Because it was bent out of shape. It had been turned and twisted and misused inappropriately. Jesus turned around when he heard what was said from this ruler of the synagogue. And he makes a very humiliating point. He says, no, wait a minute. You hypocrite. you self-righteous individual, who do you think you are? Isn't that what he was saying? He says, how many of you, or these people, on the Sabbath day, how many of you, he gets into verse 15, that has an ox or a donkey tied up when you get home from the tabernacle on the Sabbath, don't loose him up and walk him over to the water trough to let him have some water? Really? And you're going to do that with an animal and it's okay, but all I'm going to do with this woman who is suffering is speak to her, and you're going to judge me unrighteous? Who do you think you are, you bunch of hypocrites? And don't we often do that? We'll look at the sins of others, like Christ talked about, the beam in one eye versus the mote in the other. And we look at people and we see the things that they do and say, that's pitiful. That's terrible. Can't believe they did that. And then we completely ignore the things that are in our life. The self-righteousness and the judgmental attitude, and us being so bent out of shape, it's hard to tell even where we are or what we are. Going back to the book of Matthew for one other verse, Matthew chapter 12, verse 12. Christ asked the question, he says, how much then is a man, how much more then is a man better than a sheep? He's talking about the sheep herder and taking pity on the sheep even on the Sabbath day. He says, wherefore it is lawful to do well then on the Sabbath day. What? As a common practice, then, Christ says, you don't work on the Sabbath. But if there is something that comes up that's an emergency, that's good to save a life of human beings or even your animals, it's permissible. And his argument was, you think your animals are more important than this woman. If they fell in the ditch, if your ox fell in the ditch, you get him out. If your sheep was in danger, you rescue him. If your oxen or if your donkey needs water on the Sabbath, you're going to take them to water. But yet, you're condemning me because I have healed this woman simply by saying, woman, you are loosed from your infirmities. You hypocrite. What we fail to see sometimes by our words and deeds and actions is that we are no different and no better than some of these. Now, here's the thing that I want you to look at. The acceptance to the law Christ has done given. But what they were enforcing was no more than their tradition. In fact, sometimes, as it were, we still walk around today with our Mishnahs as well. The Mishnah is, of course, the printed oral religious customs of the Jews in their day. And everybody had one. In fact, they would readily carry around these printed Mishnahs with them and turn and make reference to them. Or our custom says, but yet they would double talk the law. They would turn and twist the law. But their customs, their habits, their traditions, they would try to bind on everybody. Of course, except usually themselves. What physically happened to this lady continues to spiritually happen to people today. Physically, she was bent out of shape. She was suffering. And a lot of people today are spiritually bent out of shape. And because of it, they're suffering. They're bound by Satan like she was. They're unable to stand upright before God. And they they need a touch from the Savior. They need Jesus in their life. Do you know someone like that? Been out of shape, but just need Jesus in their life. Well, what's your attitude towards that? Do you think, well, they don't deserve it? Or they won't keep it up, they won't let it last? Or those that go back into the world and then repent of it and come and ask for forgiveness and prayer? What's your attitude towards that? Do you get all out of shape because something good's happening in the life of someone else? We need to be careful and cautious in our life. If we're being out of shape, no fault of our own in a physical way, don't let it bend us out of shape spiritually as well. Let's be upright in the presence of God, even though we may be all bent over, physically in the presence of man. How is it with you tonight? A song of encouragement has been selected, so stand and we'll offer it as we sing.